Thank you guys for joining. We are focused today on escaping the table trap. And so we'll talk a little bit about tables, text, and other delights. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Today we've got Joshua Milligan, who is a Tableau Zen master and Tableau extraordinaire, as well as myself, Bridget Cogley, presenting today. This webinar is kindly hosted by Technion Data Solutions, where we provide data solutions not just with Tableau, but also Alteryx, Squarescape, Snowflake, as well as a few other platforms. We are a Tableau Gold partner and also training partner of the year. So feel free to follow our events. We've got our events page if you go to About Events, and you can find all of our events right here. We will also be posting a recording of this after the event is done. So thank you guys for joining us. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. And so you say table, I say Tableau. We all know that we get these tables and we have to work with them. So we've got two types of tables. And the first is tables as data. And this is probably in some ways what we're most familiar with, in which we get data, we connect to it, we work with it, and we begin to analyze it. But oftentimes when we're working with our stakeholder, we also get tables as visuals. And today, that's what we're going to focus on, is tables as visuals. So this could be working with a manager, this could be working with an executive, and you kind of just get this, hey, I need the table, and then this is what happens. We get the highlighted table, we get the exploration, the key numbers kind of pulled out, hey, what's going on here? So we see, for example, in this example, furniture seems to be a problem. We've got a couple other highlights of technology of, hey, the quantity seems low, but hey, we're doing good. So how do we move people from these tables? We know that A, as analysts, they're not necessarily fun to do, but B, they don't necessarily yield any real information. So one thing, let's look at why. And so tables are commonly used as a fast display of key numbers. We, as analysts, really aren't analyzing them. We're more compiling them. It's not necessarily a defined use. It's just something that, hey, you know, we can kind of highlight, and different people can use it different ways. The other thing is, as analysts, we are not the ones to analyze the data in a table. It is actually incumbent upon the end user to analyze it and make sense of it. So they may do side calculations, they may circle, they may do all sorts of things. The other thing is sometimes they use it as output and then do their own analysis on that table. But another thing that we don't necessarily talk about very often when dealing with tables is trust. So when we deal with charts, those aren't interpretation. That's our view as analysts of the data. Whereas when we do a table, it's really not our view. It's just, here are the numbers, you figure it out. And some of that, I won't lie, I do credit to legacy BI, where trying to get back to those numbers is quite painful. And it's kind of one of these, where are the numbers coming from, what numbers are included, what numbers are not. So how do we move beyond the table? So there's a few strategies that we're going to discuss today, ideally working towards table gone. So first is probably the most shocking in some ways, which is give it to them. And a lot of people are always surprised. I'm like, yeah, fine, here's your table. Sometimes I'll supplement that. Sometimes we'll do minor variations, which Joshua will show a few different variations. And then the final, which is my personal favorite, but also perhaps the most dangerous, is shocking the system. So we'll go through a little bit of these examples today. So the first is we get this kind of analysis. We get stuck in this table trap of, here is our data in a table. And so we have these monster tables. They're usually subtotal to the nth degree. We've got the pivots, so you've got to scroll and you've got to navigate. We get filters. And so we're trying to make sense of this and begin to find patterns within this data. And so the challenge is, it's hard. And it's hard to make sense. And usually people print these off or they export it out to Excel and they try to analyze it on their own. So what are some ways we can make this easier for people? So the first example, I'm actually going to pull from David Perez. And what he's done is he's done this nice meet halfway. Here's your monster pivot table. And this is a common solution that we will sometimes implement, which is kind of the build your own pivot table. And so what I've done is I've kind of thrown different metrics in here. We can take them down, we can get rid of them, we can change the metrics. And all this is what I call parameter magic. So if we go into this sheet, we can kind of see where we've got the different selections. And if we go to a selection, we can see that this is simply a case statement based on a parameter. When we set the parameter to a particular value, then it's going to pull in that metric. And then we always say NA, we just say here's a blank. So this is a nice reflexive way to kind of build a pivot table. Again, there are limitations with this type of solution. You are giving people a pivot table. They may do bad combinations. So for example, I've started with city. So it might make more sense to start with subcategory or category and then build down. But this is one way of giving people some control. You can also publish this up right to the web. So David, for example, put his out on Tableau Public. And so you can find that right here over at Tableau Public. Just look for David Perez, and you can find the Meet Halfway table. So this is out there. It's a great resource. And it's a great way to build tables and kind of put those out there for your users to kind of build the analysis that they want. You can also do variations on that. So for example, you can move some of these selections to the top. So that way you can allow people to do kind of these cross tabs as well. So you don't have to just build it one way. You can build it multiple ways. Along that same vein, you can also use Tableau's natural hierarchies to also build this out. So this is simply using Tableau's built-in hierarchies. So I have a hierarchy established under product, and all I've done is pulled that out, and I can allow my users to drill down and explore this way. So this is another way of giving users tables and allowing them to expand and subtract and kind of see the data that way. Again, this is following that kind of same idea of here is the table. Feel free to adapt it and change it and do whatever you need. Same thing here, kind of different ways to build that table and branch it out. Again, this is available on the web to where you can kind of build these tables. Now, if you've built these a lot and you're kind of ready to move your audience to a new way, I'm actually going to turn this over to Joshua Milligan to kind of show you that bridge method. He's got a couple different tactics to help you move beyond here's the very literal table to, hey, let's start putting a couple visual items in this.
Oh, thank you, Bridget. That's great. I'm going to switch over here. And yeah, so there are a couple of different things to think about as you think of transitioning people away from tables. And so I definitely appreciate what Bridget had to say about why people want tables. Often it is that trust. I need to be able to see the exact number because I don't know for sure if a bar chart's going to show me that exact number. But if you give me a table, I'll know exactly what that number is, and I can trust that table. So that can be hard to overcome. But we can start to transition people to think visually and to understand that they can trust the visualizations just as much as they currently trust that table. And so if we have a table that has been requested, so here I've got profit by categories and subcategories broken down by segment, and it makes it really easy to look up an exact value. But what it makes hard to see is which ones should stand out. I'm going to have to scan through the table, and I might be able to pick out some of the bigger numbers, maybe some of the smaller numbers, but I can only do that by scanning through the table, and I may very likely miss something. So one thing I can do for someone who really wants this table is just start to gradually push them towards a visual understanding. And one way that I can do that very easily is just taking a simple table and turning it into a highlight table. So if I copy that measure over to color and make my mark type square, now I've kept the table. It's still showing them those same exact values, but it's allowing them to very easily see things now that should stand out. And that's going to help them start to see some of the value in visualization. Another possibility is to take that table and pair it with a visualization. So here I'll duplicate, and I may build out a visualization, maybe at a higher level. So maybe if I take subcategory out and I start to look at something like this, or maybe even take segment and maybe look at something like this, and just show them different ways of visualizing that data. I may even take category, put it on color, just to help them to see that. And since they really enjoy seeing the exact values, maybe I'll show those on a label. Maybe I'll flip it around just to make sure that the labels show up. But my goal here is I know they're not going to be happy with just a visualization. They might actually. Maybe I would show this to them and they would see the value, but they may not quite trust it yet because they need that table with it. So if I pair that together with the table on a dashboard, and so I take my chart and my table, and I put those two things together so that now they can start to see that relationship. And maybe I'll even help them a little bit more, doing something like adding in highlighting. So I'll just add a highlight action so that when they hover over something, they can actually see the relationships. And so now they can start to see how that table is visualized. And that can help them sort of bridge that gap between I need a table to, oh, that visualization actually relates to the table and I can trust it because I see that those values add up correctly. And then I might even start to transition them even further. So maybe I can get them to the point where they don't have to see that table. In fact, I can help them see that if they just have that visualization, they can actually get to that table or to parts of that table, but they don't have to see it right away. So we can start out with just the visualization, and then if you want to go down and see the detail and see what makes it up, yeah, you can have that in the table form. But maybe even better is to take that and start to show them that this can be a visualization too. So we can actually break this out, maybe even keep that same consistent color palette, and now they can start to see that, yeah, I don't have to always see things as a table, and there's value when it's not a table, because now I can start to compare values. I can see rank orderings of values. If I really want to, I can still break it down by segment. If they still need it, I can turn on those labels just to help them understand that that's still the data that they want, but they don't necessarily have to see it. So that's one way that I can start to move people from wanting a table or feeling like they need a table because they only trust the table to seeing the value of visualization. Sometimes, though, people want a table because that table actually has a flow of logic or a series of calculations that they really want to be able to see that, and they think that a table is going to be what helps them to see that. So, for example, I have data here about employees and how many were hired or fired, and where we started and ended. And there's kind of a logical flow to this data. So if I start out and I say, well, I've got several different types of employees, contractor, hourly, salaried, there's a flow here. So I can say, well, here's where we ended up last year. Here's how many we hired. And here's how many we either fired or maybe they left voluntarily, so we'll place those in there. And that ends up with a net result. And then finally, we can see what our year-to-date counts or head counts are of employees. And so So some people may look at this and say, well, I want this as a table because there is a flow to it, and as I read it left to right, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. But you can do the same thing with a visualization. And if someone really wants to keep that table, what I can do is I can help blend together a visualization with the table to help them to see what's going on. So here I'll duplicate that because we'll keep the base table. But there are some things in here that would make great visualizations. And one possibility would be to keep that idea of hires and separations. So we'll keep those. And what would happen if I wanted to look at these visually? So I'll take measure values. We'll bring that up here. And now you can start to see here, I can actually visualize that as either going up or down, because that's going to, when I hire, that brings my head count up. When people leave, that brings it down. So that's great. I could even do a little bit of color coding just to help make that consistent throughout, help people see that this is hires and fires. And now my idea is that I'm going to combine this with the table. So I can do that again in the dashboard. I've got my original table. Let's make this dashboard a little bit bigger. And I'll bring out that original table here. And it does have a nice flow to it. But I also want to include a visual element to that table. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to float over top of the table, and then we'll have to do a lot of cleanup, or a little bit of cleanup at least. So we'll take away some headers because we don't need those anymore, and then we'll try to align it so that it fits nicely here. And our goal is to get it to line up pretty nicely within that table. And then we might do a little bit more cleanup. We don't need the legend necessarily, but with just a little bit of formatting, take away some column dividers, take away some grid lines, and put in some banding on the rows so that we get a match there. And then I won't spend a lot of time here trying to get it perfect, but you get the idea, and you could pretty easily go into Tableau's layout controls and adjust the exact positioning until you got it to line up exactly. But now you've kept that table and you've kept the flow of information. You can still see where you ended last year. You still have how many you hired and how many were let go or left, and you still get the net result and what that ends up looking like year to date. But you see things more visually. So it's still a table, but I've added a visual element that brings people to the point of seeing that value of, I don't need it just in a tabular format. I can have a visual element with it. And eventually, as they start to trust that visualization and as they start to see the value of that, I may move them away from tables completely so that they can start to use visualizations to get the full value and the full picture of their data. So those are a couple of minor variations. I'm going to turn it back over to Bridget at this point to talk about shocking the system completely.
Thank you, Joshua. So this is the final piece that I like to do. And this is the really kind of fun part, and this is the part that I think we as analysts really love to do, but we don't get the opportunity to do it very often because the answer is usually no, don't do it. So you'll notice a few things. I have what I would call a very highly visual dashboard here, where I've got looking at shipping at a glance, kind of the same day, first day, second day. I also kind of have an analysis of profit and shipping by customer, and then I kind of have what I call my information pane to the side, where I've got a nice summary of everything going on. It's really an attempt to take this table and put it in a visual format. So one of the first things I did is I said, well, I'm going to look at this kind of shipping mode, if you will. What falls within shipping? I'm doing a lot of filtering on this, so it's kind of, to me, it's very important. So this is one of the key filters. I'm also looking at date, and I'm doing a fair amount of sorting by certain things. So I've kind of taken what I felt like were my original requirements, customer name, order ID, and I've tried to split them up. And so this is a technique that I call faceting. And what faceting allows you to do is you can kind of take the different pieces and say, okay, well, I want to look at ship. Well, then that's going to be a filter. And I want to look at kind of where things fall. This allows my summary to change. And then I also want to be able to explore my customers and figure out, okay, well, maybe I want to look at holidays. Maybe I want to understand what's going on with my customers and get a feel for who's being affected and what do their orders look like. And so I can kind of start to see this and explore this and also focus on anything that looks odd or different to me. So kind of the different dispersions of where are people that I wouldn't be able to see in a table. Some of the other things I've done to help bridge over to this is I've included the labels in my bar charts. I've also made sure that I have the summary pane so that as people kind of hover and explore, they're not only getting tooltips, but they're also getting this nice, rich summary over to the side. Final thing, again, all of my bar charts are labeled, and I've kind of made this more like a table. So you can see my bars are very, very light, and the text is within it. So this is kind of that, hey, it's kind of a text table, but it's not. And I've also just included ways that they can control it in a way that feels very familiar. So this is definitely a shock to the system. A few other things to help facilitate this move. Typically what I do when I do these, I do go into my tooltips and I usually turn off command buttons. And a lot of us do this just because we do worry about the effects of what happens when people click on things. But sometimes you can leave them there and just show people that, hey, look, here's the data. You can get right to each individual record and you can look at it here. Or we can say, hey, let's look at customer. And again, kind of keeping this friendly. The other thing I can do is actions and say, you know what, I know you want to view certain things as a table, so I'm actually going to include a link, hey, right to our old table. So we had that nasty table trap. Well, now what I've done is I've allowed an analysis beforehand. I've reused that same table that they've made me make, but now I'm shortcutting to it so that they can see here's the summarized version. And again, if I go into the table, alter my tooltips to then allow those command buttons, they can also kind of view the raw data as well. So these are just some ways that we can allow people kind of access to the data so then they can export from here and continue to do their analysis there as well. Or I can push them off through actions to view that as a table. So there are many different ways to kind of help people move beyond the table. Typically what I find with this, there's a lot of hesitancy at first, but once people get to using it, once they're able to find the things that they're looking for, they don't want to go back. So when possible, I personally try to shock the system. Sometimes I get pushed back and then I'll kind of push back towards, okay, well, I'll make sure everything has a text label, or I'll put labels here, I'll put reference lines, and I'll do different things so that they can see the numbers. So these are all the different ways to support the user, help them move towards something a little bit more visual and soften the flow. And then you've also got the more moderate techniques of here's a table, here's some visuals on top of it. So that's all I've got. Thank you guys for joining. Joshua, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think at this point, if we have any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask those in the questions pane. And I see we've got one already. So Paul asks, at the 2015 Tableau conference, Yale University Office of Alumni Relations did a great presentation about moving from the safety blanket of a table. Recommended starting with the table everyone is used to with a viz to the right, next version viz on the left, and table on the right, next version just a viz with table on the next tab, and then next version no table. And so yeah, you can look at that at the archive site Paul mentions. And so yeah, definitely that sounds like a great presentation and a great approach. Very, very similar to some of the things that I'll do as I'm moving people away from that safety blanket. Any additional thoughts, Bridget?
No, I mean, I think that's good. Definitely using versioning and kind of flowing people through it does help. The other thing I do find with shocking the system is sometimes people don't realize what's possible, and I think that's the other reason why I do like the shock the system approach so much, is because it kind of gets people thinking, oh, this can be done like this. And again, making sure that you do provide those safety blankets of here, look, here's the table that you're used to. You can still highlight and do what you need to do.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting as you think about versioning is you've got the shock the system approach where you show them something beautiful and usable right up front, and sometimes that works really well. Sometimes that gradual change works as well. So I think you have to judge where people are on that spectrum and how they're going to respond, and decide which approach works well. But I think either can be useful depending on the audience. Sean says, thanks for the tips. Brian says, Bridget, your Superstore Logistics Customer Shipping Analysis Dashboard is gorgeous.
Thank you, thank you.
And Anne says, agree about what's possible. I find that folks ask for what they've done in Excel. And yeah, I totally agree with that. People know what they know, but sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And so yeah, if they've been using Excel or some sort of a legacy BI system, I've been on projects where what people want is, I want all of my old reports that my old system did, and they just don't even know what's possible or what kind of value they could have with Tableau and data visualization. So sometimes showing that can be very useful.
One of the other things I'll point out too is that Tableau Public is a really rich resource for just ideas and motivation. I personally really like it. Joshua has a lot of fun, so he makes a lot of these games, but he's also got some really nice serious visualizations. But this is a great way to kind of see not only what's possible, but just different ways that you can lay out information and explore information. So this is another, as you start kind of migrating people from what is to what could be, feel free to use Tableau Public. So you've got Joshua Milligan's profile. You've also got mine that you're more than welcome to explore. These are out here so that people can use these and explore and get ideas just about how to do dashboarding. We all do different things. You can also go to the gallery and just, again, see all the different ways that data can be presented.
Yeah, so.
And then final, I'm seeing a couple questions just about the recording. These are recorded. We'll have it out on YouTube as well as, I believe, our site as well. And that'll come out in the form of an email. So we'll have a link to the recording of this.
Yeah, and additionally, you can subscribe to Technion's YouTube channel, and that way you don't miss it in case the email doesn't come or gets blocked or who knows what. But you should get a link in the email, but you can always subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Perez says, I like the idea of placing the viz on top of the table. How do you ensure that the floating object will remain in its location when published on server? So yeah, there are a couple of issues to think about there. If everything in your dashboard is floating, then you shouldn't have any issues with server. Now, for presentation purposes, I think I flipped the dashboard to an automatic size. That's not good with floating objects because as the window size changes, they can get squished and moved around in funny ways. But assuming that you're using a fixed size dashboard, if everything's floating, no problem going to server. If you have some things that are tiled and some things that are floating, in older versions of Tableau, you'd start to see those shift around a little bit. Newer versions, I think, are better, but you'll still definitely want to check and adjust as needed. I would probably recommend not mixing, so as much as possible. If you're going to use floating, just make everything floating. Bridget, your thoughts?
I would definitely go either full floating or full tiled. For certain things that are not as sensitive, you can do mixed, but generally I would say avoiding mixed and trying to either pick one or the other. I personally, if you look at almost all of my layouts, exclusively use floating, and I would say Joshua probably favors more of a tiled approach. So you'll also find that you yourself will develop a preference as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely stay tuned. We're doing more webinars. As we get closer to conference, we will do a guide to conference, as well as we've got a number of other features planned as well, including a recap for the year. I know at some point we'll be discussing Tableau Drive, so if you are looking at implementing Tableau in your organization, we do have that on the roadmap as well. Please keep in mind these webinars are for you, so please feel free to email us or tweet us with ideas. I did actually get a suggestion recently, so I'll talk to Joshua as well on just incorporating your feedback. So anything we can also cover that you feel would be very helpful, we're certainly open to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.